Hi, Charlie. So today's daf, I'll give a little recap for those who missed last night, but today's daf is 66, Samach Vav, in Masechet Bava Kamma, and we got to the bottom of Samach Hey Amud Bet. So we didn't quite turn the page yet. And I promised last night that we would do a little review because we stopped in the middle. So we are going to actually start from 5 lines from the bottom. The first word on the line is Mikom Makom Kashya. But because I don't want to start in the middle of a sentence, just a quick reminder, the issue and the interesting halacha that we dealt with yesterday and will continue to deal with today and tomorrow is the question of if a person steals something and then does something to that object, does it lose its status as the stolen object of, say, Ruvain had a cow, Shimon bought the cow, not bought the cow, Shimon stole the cow and then changed it in some way. So if Shimon changed it in some way, is it now, quote unquote, Shimon's cow and he owes money to Ruvain because he stole it? But has it changed status? And the implications of that, the one we talked about yesterday, the first one, is what if Shimon then goes and slaughters the animal or sells the animal? So the Torah says that if you steal something, slaughter and sell it, you have to pay 4 or 5 times, right? But what if it changed, right? What if it's no longer the same thing you stole? Do you still have to do that? Or do you say, I stole a cow, I changed it to something, and now it's my thing, quote unquote, that I stole, and I don't pay 4 or 5 because it's my own thing that I sold or slaughtered. And the case that Rabbi Lo used yesterday was where the animal actually grew up. So you stole a baby, you stole an egel, a calf, and it got older and it became a shor. And so the question is, does that change the status and you no longer pay, which is what Rabbi Lo said, you no longer pay 4 times or 5 times what you stole. So then we started discussing the whole question of whether someone who steals something and makes a kinyan, whether that changes its status. And we have the question, the Gemara now 5 lines on the bottom says, Mikomakum kashia, because the Braita implies that that's the case, that it doesn't change the status. And says Rabbi Sheshet, it's true that there's a Braita that implies that if you change something that's stolen, it doesn't change its status, but that's because it's Beit Shammai, which is a minority opinion, but of course can be quoted in a Braita. The Amri Beit Shammai is of the opinion, 5 lines from the bottom, Shinoi b'mekomo omeid, that even if you change something, if you take an object and you good morning, good afternoon, Miriam. We are 5 lines from the bottom of Samachei Amabed. I'm trying to sort of catch us up because we're in the middle of this Braita, but we'll get there. But this opinion that is Beit Shammai, who says that even when you change an object, it doesn't change the ownership status or the legal status. And what's the case? Lo kani, you don't acquire it. Titania, natana be'etznana. So we talked yesterday, the halacha in the Torah is that you're not allowed to bring something to the Mizbeach that was used to pay a woman for sex, right? And it's non-zona. And so or mechir kelev, it's not the only thing, but it's one of the categories. So let's say a person gives a woman for etznana, for her sexual use, chitin, he gives you her grain, and she makes it into solet, or someone makes it into solet, asan solet, or zaitim or olives, asan shemen, they become oil, or they're made into oil, anavim asan yayin, grapes, and you make them into wine. And then you want to bring that flour, wine, or oil on the mizbeach. So tanicha to asur, one Braita says you're not allowed to. Tanicha to mutar, one Braita says you can. And says Rav Yosef, tani, we learned from Guryon de Ma'aspork. Charlie, I said you would probably tell us where Aspork is, but the Guryon, which is of course a famous name now in Israel because of David ben Gurion, but the lion from Aspork said that Beit Shammai osrim and Beit Hillel matirim. That Beit Shammai is the ones who say that you cannot use this flour because even though you changed it from grain to flour, it doesn't change its status. And Beit Hillel says it's not the same thing, and now it's mutar. Now, my time at the Beit Shammai, what's the reason for Beit Shammai that even though you changed it, it doesn't change its status? Dichtiv, because it says by etnan, it says gam l'rabot shinuyehem, right? It says gam, the word gam, etnan zonot mechir kelev gam shnehem, to tell you that both, even if you change them, you still can't put them on the mizbeach. Ubeit Hillel says that no, Haim, the pasuk Haim says velo shinuyehem, that not only them, not if you change it. Beit Shammai hahu Haim, turn the page. Beit Shammai said, or turn to Samach Lav Man Aleph. Haim tells you v'lo v'ladu tehem. Not, let's say you give a woman in her etznan, you give her a cow, and it has a baby. That baby is not asur on the mizbeach l'da'ata. But Beit Hillel says, well, it's true, I agree with you. But Tarti Shmamina, I learned them both. Haim velo shinoihem, haim velo vladotehem. The word haim means them only, not if you change them, and not if they have a offspring, a child. Ask the Gemara Beit Hillel chtiv gam. Says, well, you're right. The word gam, the Beit Hillel kasha, the word gam is a little problematic. So that is a little problematic. We are not going to deal with that issue today. This is obviously not our sugya. But says the Gemara now, 4 lines on the top of Samach Vav Mammon Aleph, Ad kan lo pligi. The argument between the Tanaim, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, seems to be Ella the Mar Savar, that one opinion is that Shinoi Kona, right? That's which is Beit Hillel, which is the standard opinion. That if you change something that you steal, or in the equivalent case of Etznan, it's no longer the original thing. And the other opinion, Beit Shammai's opinion, is that Shinoi is not Kona. Mar Savar ain't Shinoi Kona. But Avalinian Shlumi, but if you go back now to the original Braita, it made it sound like that when you have to pay back, Kuli Alma Kitemei Karamishalim. Everybody agrees that if you steal an animal, a young animal, it grows up, becomes a more mature animal, so it has a different name now, that when you pay back and then you slaughter it, you don't pay back 4 times or 5 times the mature animal, you pay back 4 or 5 times what you stole. Kuli Alma Kidemei Ikara Mishalim. You pay back what it was at the time you stole it. Dikatani, as now we're quoting the Braita from yesterday, Mishalim Tashlumi Kefov, Tashlumi Rabba V'chamisha Ke'en Sheganav, like it was worth at the time you stole it, which goes against the halacha that we had yesterday from Rav. Lema Tahavit Yufta de Rav. Remember, yesterday we started off by quoting Rav. We discussed it all day. The Amar Rav, we're quoting it again. Keren Kein Shiganav, the principal you pay as it was the time that you stole it, but Mishalem, sorry. You Keren Kein Shiganav Mishalem. But Tashlumi Kefov, Tashlumi Abba V'chamisha. But the extra, the bonus, the double or the 4 or 5, you pay Kishat Hamada B'din. You pay at the time that it was actually what's it called? Established that you have to pay when you sold it or stole it or shechted it. Amar Rava, now Rava gives a very creative answer, which according to Rashi is quite creative, that it really depends on whether you're paying back money or you're paying back objects. Let's say a person steals an immature animal, right? A tle, a young baby goat, right? And then he has it for a year and it grows up to a very mature goat, obviously tremendously different in value. And then he sells it, right? So the question is, what do you pay back? So says Rava, what Rav was telling us is that if you pay back the actual object, the tle that you stole, you don't pay back 4 mature, sheep or goats. You pay back 4 immature ones because you're basically recreating, let's say, or replacing what you stole. And the time you stole it, that's what it was. But if you're going to pay money, if you either because you agree to or you don't have access to animals, you're going to pay money. Then if you're paying cash, then it's no longer sort of replacement for the animal. It's a monetary thing. And once it's monetary, you go after the current monetary value. And so it's a very creative and obviously innovative and without a lot of precedent, but differentiation between when you're paying back arba v'chamisha or kefel, are you paying back the object, in which case it's what you stole, or are you paying back the value, in which case it's the current value? Now that's Rashi. Tosa thinks that this is a little bit far-fetched, and he's got a whole different explanation about how you view it, meaning it depends on the way you're looking at the tle or the value. I mean, was it a tle at that time or not? So, anyways, Tosas's pshat is different, but that's Rashi's pshat. So that's the answer to that question. Says the Gemara to continue the exact same discussion. We're almost halfway down, right where the pasuk Vayikra is in my Torah or Amar Rabba. Rabba says, this whole concept that a shinoi koneh, that if you steal something, right, or take something illicitly, or you're a shomer who watches it and you lie about it, and then you do something to it, you're mishaneh, you change the object, that you then acquire ownership over it, and the ownership could have a lot of implications, including implications that you no longer pay the new value, you pay the old value, or other implications. That is based on ktiva, it's based on a verse, utanina, and it's said in a braita or a mishnah. Ktiva, what's the pasuk? The interesting pasuk in Vayikra says that you steal something and then you find out that, basically the person lied, they said they didn't steal it, then it turns out they did. Says the pasuk, V'hashiv et hagzela asher gazal. You return the stolen thing that you stole. Now, of course, that the last 2 words there are they're very mutar, they're very extra. right? You can't return a stolen thing that you didn't steal, right? So what do you mean you return the gzela asher gazal? So what is that telling you? Says the Rabbah, asher gazal. What do we learn from these extra words? Telling you, im ke'en shegazal yachzir. If it's the same thing you stole, then you've got to return it. Vim lav, but if you've changed the object, right? You stole we're going to see the case many times. You stole a piece of wood and you built it into your house and now it's a wall. It's no longer the piece of wood you stole, then you don't have to return the object. You have to pay back damim ba'alma ba'ishlami. Then you pay back money. So once you've made a change, you actually don't have to give it back anymore. You have to pay, just to be clear. You're not free, but you don't have to give back the object because now it's considered to be your object and you stole. You destroyed basically the thing you stole. You made a new thing. The person has no claim on the new thing. They only have a claim on the money that you stole from them. So that's a pasuk. And Tanina, in fact, there's a Braita later on, which says how gozel eitzim v'asan kelim, the case I sort of just gave you, right? You steal raw wood and you turn it into finished kelim, so you incorporate it into a bed, right? Or you steal tzemer, you steal wool v'asan bigadim, and you sew it into clothing. So it's no longer the original. It is the exact same thing, right? It's not different in sense that you didn't destroy it and recreate it and melt it, but you made it into something new, which is thread and string and clothing. Then says the Mishnah later, Mishalim Kishat Hagzela, you pay at the time of the value at the time you stole it. You don't have to, as Charlie talked to us yesterday about the boat, right? You don't have to give back the whole boat. You have to give back the value of the thing at that time. Inami, and if you don't like that Braita for some reason, it's actually a Mishnah, there's another Braita which says, this is a case in Chulin, that let's say lo speak it's no lo ad savo, right? A person basically, this is a case where you have to give reshit hagez, right? Remember the Torah says that the first shearing of your sheep you have to give to the kohen. Okay. Now a kohen, of course, can't go to your house and say you owe this to me because you only have to give it to a kohen. You don't have to give it to that kohen. But the Mishnah goes through cases where the Kohen grabs it from you, and then the question is, do you have to give it back? Does he have to give it back to you? So one of the cases is lo hispik litzno lo achet savo. The Kohen grabbed it from you, right? And it was obviously the opposite case. We're not there yet. You haven't given it to a Kohen until you changed it. So you sheared the sheep. You're supposed to give these shearings to a Kohen. You don't follow the rule. And you take the shearings, you bring them to your factory, and you start dyeing them, and you turn them into yellow yarn, right? Then the Kohen grabs it from you. Then patur. You don't have to actually let the Kohen keep it because alma shinoi koneh. You see that in fact changing it by dyeing it made you acquire it. Now again, you still, like anyone who stole something, you have to give the value of the thing that you stole to a person who you stole it from, but you don't have to give the exact object because you've changed it. So that is a proof, says Rabbah, from a from two Mishnayot and from a pasuk, that if you physically change the object that you stole, you don't have to give back the object, you only have to give back the money. However, says Rabbah, what about Yeush? What if you didn't change the object at all? But what happened was, and this enters us into a huge discussion that's going to be a big Bava Metzia discussion when we talk about lost objects, but the question of what if the owner gave up hope? Right? Yeush means they abandoned all hope. So someone had something stolen from them, and it's the nature, let's say there's different kinds of Yeush. Some is where the person explicitly says, there's no way I'm going to get this back. Or it's a type of object that everyone thinks you won't get back, right? So you left your iPod, or what do you call it, AirPods on the subway, right? So there's not a chance in the world you're going to get those back, right? Obviously. So once you realize you left them, people don't go back and look for them, at least not after 30 minutes, let's say, because they know it's impossible, right? It's a tiny little mobile thing with nothing identifying. Again, that might be a bad example because I actually have identifiers, but whatever, right? So you left $20 sitting on you. There's nothing to identify. You definitely give up hope. It doesn't mean that a person who took it didn't steal it, right? So in things where a person is miya'ish, and let's say someone comes into my house, steals things from me, I think there's no chance I'm going to get them back. But then it turns out 3 weeks later, they find the robber, or the guy comes and admits. He says to me, I admit I took it from you, but you gave up on it. So I don't want to give it back to you. I'll give you back the money. That's the question. Says Rabbah, Amri Rabbanan denikni. Some rabbis say that, in fact, the robber is koneh because you gave up, which means that he only has to pay back money, doesn't have to give the thing back. because by you giving up on it, he basically was able to acquire it. And there's some rabbis who say, Amri Rabbanan Dinikni. Where am I? Sorry. Amri Rabbanan Dinikni. The some say the rabbis say that you're a konet. Sorry, I lost the place. Mihu, however, says Rabbah, lo yadinan. I'm not sure, or we're not sure. Idoraita idrabanan. Is this midoraita or is this midrabanan? Meaning, is the fact that you, a robber, acquire something when the owner that you stole it from gives up hope on it? Is that midoraita or is that midrabanan? Why would it be one or the other? So says Rabbah, right? I don't know if it's doraita drabanan, because idoraita, it might be that it's doraita. Midi dahavi amotse avida. It might be similar to the case where you find, again, this is a case we're talking about of stealing, but it might be similar to a case where you find a lost object, right? I'm walking down the street, I didn't steal anything, and on the side of the road is an apple, okay? I pick up an apple. Somebody lost this apple. Now, it's pretty likely to think that whoever lost their apple does not think that they're going to get that apple back. Again, there could always be exceptions, and it's a case-by-case thing. But we know that by an aveda, right? Midave motzei aveda. We know that if a person finds an aveda, lav kivan de miyaesh maram minei, mikami de yade. If the owner gave up on it before you, the finder, picked it up, kanile, then the person who picked it up is koneh that thing. Right, and we learned that in Bava Metzia. Like I said, we're going to discuss this in great detail. But we actually learned that from a pasuk, right? That in fact, if a person gave up, someone found their thing, then the person who lost it finds out, right, that you found my thing and says, "I want it back." They don't have to give it back to you, right? Well, actually goes through some of the cases. One of the cases in the Gemara in Bava Metzia is where there's a hurricane, right, or a flood. And so the flood, the river comes, it gathers up all your stuff and it washes it downriver. So it's totally reasonable to expect you're never going to see that thing again, right? Especially in a time when they didn't travel. Turns out that unexpectedly, your boat caught on a tree 50 feet down the bend and someone got it. And 2 weeks later, you see someone sailing your boat up the river. So you say, I want my boat back. The Gemara says you don't have to give it back because since the person gave up hope on it as soon as it swept away, and then you found it, you found a lost object, not a lost object, a hefker object. So just like in that case, if the owner gave up hope before you came to your hand, the finder is koneh. Hainami here too. Now, of course, this is a very different case, but Hainami given to miyaesh mara kanila. Since the owner gave up on it, you are koneh. Now, of course, this case is super different because the owner, by definition, did not give up on it before you got it because you stole it from him. So the only way he gave up on it is because you stole it. Right, so the Gemara, so Tosfos discusses it in detail, right? That does not seem to be the same case, but let's put that aside for a second. So maybe it's midoraita, and the Gemara in Bava Metzia actually learns this out from a pasuk that there's a reason. We know from a verse that if someone loses something and gives up hope on it, and someone else finds it, that he cannot then reclaim it. Almakani, odilma, that's right, or maybe lodamila aveda. Right? It's not like an Aveda because Avedahu, as I mentioned, again, Tosfos, as I said, talks about the question of whether the Yish happened first or you got it. But the Gemara makes a different distinction. It could be by an Aveda, when you picked it up behetera, right? You picked it up, you're allowed to. It's at that point, you're finding it. But avahai given to be surat aliyadeh, since this one came to your hand, it prohibited, you took it, you stole it, maybe midoraita, you're not kona, but the Rabbanan say you're koneh. Why? Midrabanan hu da'amar, midrabanan hu, da'amar Rabbanan nikni mipnei takanat hashavim. Maybe the reason the Rabbanan say that if I steal an object and the owner of the object gives up any hope of ever getting back, and then 2 weeks later I go back to him and I say, I feel terribly guilty, I admit I stole your Kiddush cup, right? The guy says, okay, give it back to me. He says, no, I don't have to give it back to you. You gave up on it, but I'll pay you what it costs. Tell me what it costs. So says Rabbah, the other possibility is that we allow that because of what's called takanat hashavim, right? We want people to give things back. And so obviously people steal things because they want them, not always, but sometimes. And if you make it more difficult for a person to return something, you say, if you admit that you stole, you're going to have to give the thing back, people are not going to as easily admit that they stole because they love the cashmere coat that they stole, right? So if you give them an out and say, look, if you admit you can pay back the money, then again, it's only if the owner gave up hope, right? If the owner never gave up hope, then you can't obviously rely on this, right? Because the owner is still looking for the thing. But if the owner gave up hope on ever getting it back, then we made a special, maybe, takanam bidrabanan, that you're allowed to then only give back the money and you don't have to give back the object. So that is Rabba's statement. Rabba takes it for granted that if the owner is miyaesh, gives up hope, then the robber does not have to give back the object. He's just not sure whether it's midoraita or midrabanan. And Rav Yosef said, I don't agree with that at all. Three lines on the bottom. Yush eno koneh afilu midrabanan. Even if you give back an object, even if the owner gives up, even midrabanan, the robber is not koneh, and you have to give back the actual object if you still have it. There's no out from giving back the object just because the owner gave up hope on getting it back. Eitvei Rav Yosef the Rabbah. So Rav Yosef asked Rabbah on your opinion from the following case. We're going to have a breita later on, a very interesting breita, which you'll see is quite relevant. Let's say gazal chametz, right? Let's say someone breaks into your liquor store and steals $1,000 bottle of whiskey, which I'm told exists, something like that, right? So you steal that, and you take it home, and of course you don't have a chance to drink it, and it's Erev Pesach, so you put it down in the basement, right? Avar alav Pesach, and Pesach passes, and you feel really guilty about stealing this. So right after Pesach, you go back to the shop and you say, here's your $1,000 bottle of whiskey back. Amar lo, turn the page to Samach Vav Amabet. You say to the guy, okay, here, your thing is back. I'm sorry I took it. I want to give it back to you, right? Now, of course, that's a case where the owner was miyaesh, right? Because the owner lost his bottle of whiskey, and he knows that whether I get it back or not, it's Pesach. And since Pesach came and it's chametz, it's going to be chametz shavalav Pesach, and I'm never going to get it back anyways. So by definition, the owner of the whiskey gave up on the whiskey or whatever chametz was because it went Pesach. But still, the Breita says that the robber can go back to him and say, "Look, it's yours. I didn't change it. I didn't do anything to it. Imperceptibly, it became chametz shavalav Pesach, but I'm allowed to give it back. How come?" Right? Hi, it's asking where given the mata idan isura. Right? Once the time for Isser of Chametz, once Pesach came, vadem yaesh. The shop owner definitely said, "Look, my whiskey's gone because even if the person gives it back to me, it's going to be chametz, right?" If when a person gives up, person who was stolen from gives up, it goes into the ownership of the robber. So then the robber owned it, and it became chametz under his watch. So how could he give it back not it became chametz, but it's a different thing, right? It's now owned by him. And just like I said, if the owner gave up, you don't give back the object, you give back the money. Here too, you shouldn't be able to give back the object, you should give back the money. You should have to give back $1,000, right? Why can the person say to him, "Look, here's your bottle of whiskey back"? You should have to pay him good absolute money. So that seems to prove you're wrong, Rabba, says Rav Yosef. Right? Because here there was clearly a case of Yi'ush. The man stole the bottle of whiskey. The original owner, the person it was stolen from, gave up on it because Pesach came. And yet we're saying that you're allowed to give back the bottle. You don't have to give back the money. Says Rabbah, one second, you're making a mistake. Amarle, Kika Mina Ana. When I say that when the person it was stolen from gave up hope, that the robber is koned, it's when the robber wants to be koned, right? Zem mityaesh, where the one it was stolen from gives up, v'zer rotzel liknot, and the robber wants to acquire it. But in this case, the robber doesn't want to acquire it because Pesach's coming. In this case, zem mityaesh, sure, the liquor store owner gave up hope that he's going to get it back. But ze eno rotzel liknot. But since the robber doesn't want it, you don't force him to take it. He can take it. So since he doesn't want it, it's not his, and therefore he can give it back, even though it's worthless.
So what if the robber is a non-observant Jew who eats chametz on Pesach?
So then he would not be midyaesh. But in the Gemara, we always assume very firm robbers, right? It's very
right. That's true.
They follow all the rules except for the one they're breaking. That's
right.
the basic assumption. Eitvei Abaya the Rava. Now Abaya asks, again, there's a difference in Gersi here, Rava, Rabba. What about the following? But mainly, the main reason to change it, of course, even though it's a question on Rabba, but Abaya and Rabba were not contemporaries, right? Abaya and Rava were. So Abaya asked Rava the following question. It says in the pasuk that you bring a karban im ola karbano, right? It's beginning of Parshat Vayikra. What does it mean karbano? Says the Breita karbano v'lo hagozel. You can only bring your own carbon. You cannot bring something you stole as a carbon. Okay. Now, what's the case, right? I walk into your house. I take a beautiful young, again, these are robbers who are very religious, right? I walk into your house. I'm dying to bring a carbon to Hashem. I don't have any money. So I steal a carbon. People do this all the time, unfortunately, right? They want to do a mitzvah. They don't have money. They steal something, sadly. They always justify it somehow. But I want to bring a carbon. I want to bring a carbon Pesach. Say, well, it's an Olah here. So I want to bring a carbon Olah. I don't have any animals, but I walk by your house. You got a beautiful sheep. I steal your sheep and I bring it to the Beit HaMikdash. Says the pasuk, you can't bring that as a carbon because it's stolen. Says that's a pasuk. Now ask ask Abaya, Hechidami, what's the case? Right? If the owner didn't give up on it, then lama likra. Of course I can't bring a carbon. It's not my thing, right? I can't go and donate your car to the Beit HaMikdash. Right? Lama likra pshita. It's obvious. You can't give someone else's thing to the Beit HaMikdash. Elalav, it must be the case is, I stole your tle, your sheep. You gave up. You're like, I'm never going to see the sheep again. So you were miyaesh, lav la'achar yiush. And what you see is that even though the owner gave up and I stole it, I can't bring it as a carbon in the Beit HaMikdash. Shema mina yiush lo kani. This seems to prove that you're wrong, or that Rab is wrong if it was a question on Rabbah. Amar le Rava said back to him, or Rabba would have said, I don't understand. Tamech, look at the following, another bright with Haditanya, Mishkavo, Velo Hagazul. This is a really different case, but the Pasuk talks about a Zav, right? A Zav is a woman, a Zava is, or Zav is a man or a woman who has a discharge. And the Torah says Mishkavo, what they lay on, what they sit on becomes Tameh, right? And so the pasuk says mishkavo, only what they own, the chair that they sit on, and the Braita says v'lo hagazul, not something that they stole, right? They stole a chair or stole a bed and lay down on it. It doesn't become tamei. Now asking about hechidami again. What's the case? Amra mishkav. Let's say they stole a piece of wool, right? And they sewed it and changed it into a mattress, into a bed. So that's a shinoi. Everybody agrees. Is there anyone who says that if you physically change the object, right? You steal wool, you turn it into leather, into a bed, of course you're kona, right? And therefore it's not owned by the person who sleeps on it. What are you going to say? It must be where you're a gazal mishkav dechavre. The case there of mishkavo, where we say it's not yours, must be where you stole a finished bed, right? It's a finished mattress that was full, and you basically then stole it and lay down on it. You don't make it tameh. Now, Tosas is again very bothered by what I just said, which seems to be what Rashi said, because Tosas points out that Tuma really has nothing to do with who owns the thing, right? If you're tameh and you touch something, it becomes tameh, not whether you own that thing or not own that thing. So, anyways, it's a little more complicated. Remember, with a mishkav of a zav, doesn't necessarily touch it. It could be indirect. So, but that's a sugya for tuma of a zav. But says Rava, hachinami, the case here by a karban does not have to be a case where you stole a person's animal, and then the question is, did they give up or not give up? Can you bring it as a karban? The case could be the gazal karban dechavre. You didn't steal his lamb, you stole his lamb that was already a karban, right? So meaning he had a separate area in his property where he kept his karbanot, waiting to bring them up to the Beit HaMikdash. And you were like, oh, I'm going to the Beit HaMikdash. Let me look like a good guy. And you steal his karban and go to the Beit HaMikdash to bring it as a karban. The Torah says that's not a karban because you stole it, right? So because that's what the Torah is telling you. Not that if you changed it, it becomes yours or doesn't become yours. You actually took a karban. And that's what the Torah is saying. It's still not okay because of this special rule that it has to be karbano. You can't do it for somebody else unless they want you to. Okay, says Gemara, well, let's ask another question. Eitzve Abaya, we're at the 2 dots now, a third of the way down. Abaya asked a question on Rav Yosef. Remember, Rav Yosef is one who says that a shinoi is not kona, no matter what. Midrabanan, not shinoi, sorry. A yiush is not kona, whether it's doraita or drabanan. If a person steals something and then the owner gives up hope that they'll ever get it back, it does not belong with that alone to the person who stole it. Eitvei Abai, the Rav Yosef from a Mishnah in Masechet Kelim. The Mishnah says the following: Orot shel balabayit. If you have hides that are owned by civilians, what balabayit means here, meaning a non-professional, right? So remember that skin of an animal is not like anything, and like fruits, like anything, is not mitame until it becomes a finished product, right? So you kill your deer, you kill your cow, you take the hide, and you have to start processing it, right? Now, of course, you can process it many ways. You can use it in its raw form as a, I don't know, as a mat or something. You can process it and use it to eat off. You can process it even more and use it to write on or for clothing or for shoes. Right? There's a lot of different levels of processing of an animal's skin, hide, right? So says the Mishnah in Kelim, if you have skin that are owned by a civilian, by a balabayit, if machshava mitamatan, if the person thinks, I'm going to use it the way it is, I'm not going to process it any further. I'm going to use this as a wall hanging, as a mattress or something that makes it suitable. It doesn't become tameh, but it becomes suitable to accept tuma. So that if then someone touches it, it becomes tameh, right? But shall abdan, but if you are a professional skin, how do you translate abdan in English?
Tanner,
Sorry?
Tanner.
Tanner, okay. If you're a tanner, then ein machshava mitamatan. Then your machshava does not make it tameh. And the reason being is that you run a shop, right? You've got this raw piece of leather or whatever it's called, hide, and you say, okay, I decided I'm just going to sell it. I want to make $50. I'm going to sell it to the next person who comes in as a match, as a rug. But someone then comes in and says, oh, I love that piece. Can you work it and make me a pair of shoes, right? Which would be worth several $100s, but take a lot of work. So since that's your profession, you're going to change your mind when the next person walks in the door, right? So even though you've thought that you're going to turn it into something, since you didn't do an act to do it, right? It's not considered to be final because you're a professional. But if you're a balabayit, you're not making shoes out of it, and therefore it's tameh. It's suitable to tameh as soon as you have the thought. So that's the Mishnah. Continues the Mishnah. This is why we're bringing it. Shel ganav. Now, if you stole the hides, right, then, this is interesting, machshava mitamatan. Now, remember, a ganav, as opposed to the next case, which is a gazlan, a ganav is someone who does something openly, right? You know who did it, as opposed to a gazlan who does it in a private way, right? You don't actually know who did it, right? Remember, so a ganav is, I don't know how we translate in English, but a ganav is someone who steals something, you don't know who they are. They took it at night, right? So that's where you pay kefil, remember? A gazlan is someone who boldly took it in the middle of the day, right? They just walked in, they pushed you over, and they stole your thing. So
Yeah, so
You said the opposite. You just said the opposite.
sorry, I said it, let me say it clearly. Say that again?
Koran translates them as thief and robber.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I said it the right way, right? A ganav is where you don't know who did it, and a gazlan is where you do know. Okay, good. I just want to make sure. And a ganav is where you pay kefil. Remember, we had this discussion, but that's not today's discussion. So says the Mishnah in Kalim, if the ganav took it, then machshava mitamatan. Then the thought is of the ganav to use it as a rug, makes it suitable to accept tuma. And shel gazlan, but if the gazlan took it in machshava mitamatan, then it's not. And the Gemara, and we'll see in a second Rabbi Shimon's opinion, but the explanation of this in Kalim is that if a person stole it, of the ganav, you don't think you're ever going to get it back, right? Because you have no idea who stole it. So there's no way you're going to get it back. And therefore you give up. And so since the original person gave up hope, the ganav owns it, and the ganav can make it into a kli, and therefore it can become tameh. A gazlan, you know who stole it from you. He walked into your store and pushed you over and took it. So you're going to call the police, and they're going to go get it back from him. So you don't give up hope. You expect to get it back. And since you expect to get it back, you're not miya'ish, and you didn't give up hope. And therefore, the gazlan is not koneh, he can't make it tameh. Okay, that's the explanation. Rabbi Shimon says, actually, it's the opposite way. Chiluf hadvarim, it's actually the exact opposite way. Ishel gazlan, if it was stolen in a way that you knew who took it, then in fact, you do give up hope. Why do you give up hope? Because if this guy is so brazen as he can walk into my face and steal from me, clearly he's not going to be intimidated by the police, right? Shel gazlan machshava mitamatan. So therefore, I gave up hope that I'm going to get it back, and machshava is mitameh. And shel ganav, there you have you're hopeful that, I don't know who stole it, but maybe we'll track him down and maybe we'll find the cameras or whatever. And then ein machshava mitamatan. But either way, the reason is lefisha lo nityashu habalim, right? Either the ganav or the gazlan, depending on which tani you hold up, if the owners didn't give up hope, then the robber cannot turn it into something that's tameh because he's not the owner. But what you see from there is, Shema Mina, you see that the converse is true, that Yi'ush koneh, right? That if the person it was stolen from gave up hope that he's going to get it back, either because of ganav or a gazlan, then the person who stole it owns it. And if that owner, quote unquote, the robber, then says, I want to use this for my floor, right? For my rug, then it's suitable for tumah, just like the original Baal Bayit. So that proves that Rav Yosef is wrong. As Rav Yosef said, that Yi'ush is not koneh. Amrlei, Rabbi Yosef would say to you, here it's not talking about where you just thought about it. It's talking about where you not only thought about it, even though the Braita says that, the Mishnah says that, you actually cut off the edges. You did kitzan, which means you trimmed them, right? So basically you had a beautiful rug, but there were some loose ends because it's an animal, and there's the neck part and then this part. And so you made some small changes, right? Now, so Tosas points out, or as everyone points out here, that trimming him seems like an action, right? Everybody agrees that the action matters. The point is that it's a very minor action. So kitzan is you just made a very small cut at the end. It's not you didn't form it into a shoe. And therefore, it takes a combination of that action plus Yi'ush to make it yours. But Yi'ush alone is not enough. It needs Yi'ush plus an action. Matkifla Rabba Bar Rav Chanan, Rabba Rav Chanan asked the question, Halo itzba shanukan, v'itzba in tzricha kitzua. We're talking not about what we're talking about here is an itzba. This is a very technical term in Kalim, which translates as a table, basically. I don't know if there's a better word than table, but meaning they used to do this. I think people still do it today, right? You'd have a wooden frame and you would take a piece of leather and you would tie it around that frame to make your table, right? So that's a kind of thing where you obviously don't have very fine leather, right? You need something very thick and it needs to be clean, I guess, but it needs to support things. So when you're talking about an itzba, you don't need to cut off the edges. Who cares about the edges, right? You're not caring. You're tying them over the sides. So since you don't care about the edges, why would you cut it off? It's not. Now, how do I know that that's true? Because if you didn't learn Kalim recently, there's another Mishnah in Kalim, in the 26th parak of Kalim, Kol makom she'en chisaron melacha. The Mishnah in Kalim says wherever you take an object and there's no action that needs to be done to make it suitable for its purpose, then machshava metamato. Then if you think, okay, I want to use this now as my table, and you don't need to do anything else to make it a table, then machshava metamato. Then just thinking I want it to be that makes it suitable for tumah. But if it's yesh chisaron melacha, you still have to work. Meaning you look at this piece of leather and you say, I want to turn this into a shoe, right? It's not a shoe until you make it a shoe. So then at that time, it's not tameh. Ein machshava metamato. Says the Mishnah, that's why we're quoting it, chutz mina itzba, except for an itzba. That's an exception. Even though an itzba, which again is this sort of table, leather table, even though an itzba does need to be worked a little bit more, you need to smooth it down, you need to take away the hair maybe, I don't know if that's possible, part of it, you need to cut off the edges, you could use it the way it is. So although you definitely want to make it nicer, it's functional right now. Because you could take this, you can lay it down, and it'll be your picnic table, right? You don't have high standards. And so therefore, even though it needs more melacha, a machshava is mitama. So how could you say that the case there is where you trimmed it, trimming it has no implication? Elama Rava says, Rava, you know what? This is really a big problem. And it turns out, Hamilta Kashiba Rabba, the Rav Yosef, Esther Mitartin Shnin. For 22 years, Rabba would needle Rav Yosef about this Mishnah in Kelim, which seems to prove that he's wrong. That even Yi'ush is Koneh, right? That even though he said Yi'ush is not Koneh, this Mishnah seems to indicate that Yi'ush, giving up hope, gives the object to the robber, and he could then make it Tameh. And Velo Ifrike and Rav Yosef never had an answer for this question from Rabba. Until 22 years later, Rashi, of course, reminds us that the story, does Rashi remind us? Sorry. I'll remind you. I thought Rashi did. Where's Rashi? Not here, at least. That
Rashi.
a story in the Gemara in Brachot where they were debating whether Rabba or Rav Yosef should be the new Rosh Yeshiva. And anyways, Rabba was the one who was chosen, and he said he was for 22 years, then he died, and then it became Rav Yosef, right? So for 22 years that Rabba, those were the years Rabba was the Rosh Yeshiva, he couldn't find an answer until Ad Yativ Rav Yosef Oration. So Rav Yosef became the Rosh Yeshiva when Rabba died, and that day he got the inspiration to understand the answer, Pirka, and he was able to answer the question, and the answer that he came up with was, this is very different, because this is a Shinoi Hashem. What you're basically doing is you are changing the description. This piece of leather, right, let's say, used to be, I don't know, I guess a piece of leather. But basically now that you're calling it a table, right, this new surface that you're calling it, this itzba, you've changed what it is. And so by changing its name, Shinoi Hashem Kishinoi Ma'aseh Dami. Changing its name is the equivalent to actually doing a physical act. Why is that? Shinoi Ma'aseh my time. Why is it that everyone agrees? If you steal something and you physically change it, that you now own it, and you don't have to give back the object, you only have to give back the value. Because Hata Meikara Eitzim Hashta Kelim. There, the object that you stole was wood, and you turned it into a chair, right? Or a bed. So Shinoi Hashem Nami, the same thing would be true about Shinoi Hashem, Meikara Karle Mashka. Again, I don't know these terminology, but originally what you call a unfinished piece of leather, a hide, is a mashka. And now hashta abarzin. Now it's all of a sudden a table, right? And so it's an abarzin. And so because you basically decided without touching it even, or really touching it, you decide without changing it to make it a table, it has a new name. And therefore, since it has a new name, you treat it totally differently. And it is a shinoi, and everyone agrees that shinoi is kona in that example.
We
I think
also,
that abarzin is a Persian word.
Okay, what does it mean in Persian though?
It's
A table, right?
it's a
a
tray. Here it says a tray.
a saddle cover.
Saddle. Well, okay, but maybe not. But here it's not referring to saddle cover. It's referring to what Miriam's saying. It's referring to a surface that you
Yeah.
put food on. That's why I called it a table. But I guess the tray is the same thing.
Yeah. But in terms of like the change of the name makes it a different object, we see that in Basar v'Chalav also. Where like I don't remember exactly which one it was, but it's like the chalav that becomes like cheese or something, and then it becomes completely different. So the fact that it has a different name, you actually consider it differently.
So that's the same thing here, exactly.
Yeah.
So treat it differently, right? Because it's a Shinoi Hashem. Ask the Gemara. Let's just do two more lines in our last minute. Harim Marish. Well, what about? And this is the famous case of a marish. Marish is a huge beam that you put, like a ship mast. So you have a marish, right? You take a beam and you want to use it as the foundation of your whole house, and you steal it, right? You don't have enough money. You can't find a beam. They're very rare. I guess especially in those days, they didn't have a lot of trees that they could cut down that were that long and tall. You finally get one, you steal it, and you put it into your house. The Ika Shinoi Hashem. And now it's not called a beam anymore. It's not called, well, it's called a beam, but it's not called, it's called now let's read the Gemara. The Meikar Kishura. Originally you called it a kishura, which is usually the word we would use for a piece of wood, a beam. The hashta tilala. Now that you put it in your house, you call it a tilala. I don't know how you translate tilala in English, but it's what do they say?
Stealing.
Ceiling. That's what Rashi says, gag, right? But
Yeah.
so now it's a ceiling, so it's the same thing, right? But it was originally a beam or a piece of wood, a long thing, and now it's a ceiling. Vitznan. Now we learned in a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah we had in Gittin. Al Hamarish Hagazol. Remember, we talked about all the takanot they made for Tikkun Olam. One of them was if you steal a beam, Shebano bebira, and you build your building, and this is your foundational building, right? Shenotel damav. You don't have to give back the beam. Because otherwise no one's ever going to return something. You're going to have to destroy your whole house to give back, the cornerstone that you stole. So we allow you to pay back the value instead of giving the thing. Now says the Gemara, 1 second. Taima, the Mishnah says the reason you can give back the value is mipnei takanat hashavim, because we want you to do tshuva, we want to give back, we don't want you to keep it. But implies that if there wasn't a takanat hashavim, turn the page quickly, halav hachi hadar be'ina. Well, then you'd have to give back the actual object. Why would you have to give back the actual object? If you say a shinoi Hashem changes the status, this used to be a beam and now it's a roof, why would you have to give it back? Even if you didn't have a takana. Amar Rav Yosef says, Rav Yosef, no. Marish, if you're talking about a beam, shmo alav. We still call it a marish, right? Meaning when you see that huge beam in someone's house, you look up at the ceiling and you say, that's the beam, right? You don't necessarily call it the roof because it's very recognizable. The Tanya, in fact, there's a Braita that says, based on a very esoteric, as almost every pasuk in Yecheskel is, pasuk in Yecheskel describing the building of the Beit HaMikdash, it says, Tzilaot habayit, these are I don't know, the side parts of the bayit. Ela midlatitim, these are what are called midlatitim, meaning the support
Casing.
things. Sorry.
Casings,
Yeah, I know what
wooden.
that means exactly. But Rashi explains that these are what are sunk into the wall, meaning they're flush with the wall. The ubim, and the pasuk says the word ubim, which are Elo hamarishot. These are the beams that you see above the ceiling. But basically, what you see is that even after you build a beam into a roof, it's still called a beam, right? It's not called a roof anymore. So because it's so distinguished. And so therefore, that specific case, if you steal a huge beam and put it into your house, you would have thought you have to return the beam and knock down your whole house because it's still a beam. You didn't change it, right? You didn't cut it or rebuild it. You didn't change the name on it. The owner didn't give up hope, maybe, or maybe did give up hope, whether you're Rabba or if Yosef. And so therefore, you would have thought you have to actually knock down your house and give back the beam. That's where the Mishnah in Gittin says there's a takanat shavim that you don't have to do that. But we're going to end today to say that, in fact, this machloket of Rabba and of Yosef stands about whether Yiush is Kona or Yiush is not Kona when you talk about Gizela, about stealing things. And I guess tomorrow we'll pick it up from there.
What would be the scenario in the case where if someone were to steal money and that person invests that money in the stock market and the money goes up like 80% or 100%, what would he have to return? The original amount or
Yes.
the value of the stock?
So only the original. So money is a separate case, right? Because we never view money as being an object like a diamond ring or something. Right? Money, the words we often use lahotzanitna, right? You're meant to spend it. So if you actually steal something that's cash, that's indistinguishable, you don't have to give back the same cash. And certainly in that case, if it goes up in value, you don't have to do it. But the same thing would be true of, let's say you stole a cow, right? And that cow then had many babies and became, a flock of cow, whatever the words are, a herd of cows. You don't have to pay back the herd. You just have to pay back the value of the cow that you stole. The machloket we had earlier, the debate we had earlier was if the cow itself went up in value because the market changed, do you have to pay the current value or the original value? But you definitely don't have to pay the totzaot, meaning the consequences of what you did with that money. Not that you should steal, to be clear. Okay, everyone, Shavua Tov. Miriam, we'll see you in person next week, maybe?
Bezrat
I
Hashem.
don't know if in person. We'll see you in person in Zoom in Riverdale, but okay.
Yeah, I'm
Shavua Tov.
leaving tomorrow.
We'll have a safe trip back.
Safe travels, Miriam.
Take care.